Well, Jeremy was asking me where I've been the last few weeks, and actually, like 2 weeks ago, is one of the most interesting weeks of my career so far. I started out. I got to go to Google X,
Oh, cool.
which is like the top secret Google development thing, and we were talking about augmented reality. I'm working on an augmented reality project for the Air Force. And then after that, I was in San Francisco and I visited one of our augmented reality partners. And then I got to go to a wine industry conference in Napa with the CMOs of all the wine companies
Oh,
up there.
wow.
So that was very interesting. And then I finished the week. I'm doing a project for Adidas in Los Angeles. It's one of the hardest marketing projects I've ever done. And I gave the presentation, and that went real well. So, but it was a very, very interesting week. But that's pretty typical of what I do.
Yeah.
So if you throw a speech in there, I gave the speech to the wine industry people. That's pretty much that's my life these days.
That's great.
Meeting, consulting, teaching, and
So I have to tell just sort of an intro story. I met Mark. I guess it was 2008. And Mark at that time probably had I don't know 1,000 followers on Twitter. It was
as a
not
start now.
just starting out, just started blogging, and so it was interesting because when you came, we were just starting to talk about building a community and what do you have to do in order to really build that around. And I think that's something that you'll definitely be able to talk to. But Mark and I tweeted back and forth. He's a retired executive from Alcoa, has lived all over the world, and came back to Knoxville. And so we decided to have lunch one day and have had lunch probably every quarter since.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting. While I've just stayed here in my little role, Mark's grown into an amazing national, world celebrity, international celebrity. So just the power of reaching out and connecting, I think is one thing. But just because we were talking about community, talk a little bit about the community that you have on Grow and sort of what that's turned into.
Well, I'm really fortunate. There's a trend right now, actually, with people eliminating comments from their communities. And they just say it's too much work, there's too much spam. But my community is a joy, and I get just smart, caring people on there every day. I get a little bit of spam you have to deal with,
Right.
but generally it's like Christmas every day. I mean, people write comments that sometimes are better than the original blog post. And I think it comes from, I mean, I'll never forget, and I hope I never will. I can't imagine that I would. Like when I first started blogging and you first started getting your first comments on your blog. What amazement. It's just amazing. It's a thrill that people are spending time reading something that I wrote, something that I created. And I never take that for granted. And when people leave comments on my blog, I always I want to love on them,
Yeah.
because it's such a gift.
Yeah.
And so I try to go out of my way to really take care of the people in my community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, you told me a story once where you would just, and I know a specific example where you just called somebody that had been commenting on on the blog for a while. You called them, and it turns out that you guys actually got to meet in Europe at one point. Is that?
Oh, I've had lots of experiences like that. I think my latest success story that I am so proud of is there's a young lady. She'd been following me at blog for a while, and she would leave comments. And one day, she left a comment, and she was really struggling with something. She was really confused about something. So I said, just call me up. Let's talk about it, rather than try to come here. So we talked about it. We became friends, and I really became aligned with the way she was thinking, the way she was writing. She's a stay-at-home mom trying to start her business, and now she's become an employee. And she's helping me with design. And one of the things we're doing is we're taking old ideas from blog posts that I wrote maybe 2 years ago, and she's creating is designed to turn it into a PowerPoint presentation that we're putting on SlideShare.
Nice.
And some of the original blog posts might have got maybe 10,000 views, and I've got a SlideShare now that has 80,000 views.
Wow.
So we have this. We have this wonderful collaboration. We're kind of setting the standard on how to reignite some of this content.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a great story.
That's really cool. Well, it's interesting to think about, and this is something that we haven't really talked about in the class, but it's a great example of creating content that is more evergreen, and content that is still viable 2 years later. How do you think about that? How do you come up with the content? Or do you think about that on the front end to go, this is something that's going to last forever, or is it more in retrospect?
A lot of my content does have long legs because I like to. It's actually, I'm in conflict right now. Can you see the angst? Can you see the confusion? Can you see it? And the conflict I'm in is that a lot of the people on my blog enjoy the how-to blog posts, kind of social media 101. And when I write those posts, I get a lot of traffic. I get a lot of comments. It kind of goes crazy. But I'm getting a little bored with that. So, I mean, I like to write about what's next. I like to write about big picture, big changes, strategy, and how do we think about all this stuff? How is it going to impact the world and us as individuals? And so those posts, they may not do as well.
Right.
But that's what I want to write about. I think if I don't write what's interesting to me, what's fun for me, that'll eventually show up, in the community. So a lot of my posts are kind of evergreen because I'm writing about these big picture kind of things.
So let me ask you a question about this, because I think it's interesting. Even in younger groups, there's a fear about jumping in and finding out about new things. And when I think about this stage of your career, it's continually building on new experiences, jumping in, figuring out things that you may not know about, figuring out things that somebody else may not know about, there may not be an answer to. But describe that, because I think a lot of people, they're user testing. People are afraid to click on certain buttons because they don't want to get somewhere that they don't know where they're going to go, or they're scared that they're going to mess everything up.
That would be me.
So how is that? How have you been able to take that, and continue that sort of wonderment and excitement about the world?
Well, one of the things it seemingly appears that I've failed at is focus. Because I really haven't focused on I wrote a book about Twitter. I wrote a book about blogging. I wrote a book about influence marketing, and then my new book is kind of social media explain what you'd think would have been the first book. But and so I'm interested in a lot of different things. I'm interested in Facebook. I started a podcast, and most people focus. I was listening to a podcast today with a bright young guy named John Loomer. All he writes about is Facebook advertising, not just Facebook. Facebook advertising. Right? That's his niche. All right. And what I discovered is, what I've kind of come to terms with is my niche is me, which I think is legitimate, and I think it can be legitimate for other people too. That I have a unique set of experiences, education, my work life, and I think about things in a certain way, and so I think people are attracted to my views. My way of thinking. So I think it's almost like I'm a storyteller. Like Malcolm Gladwell writes about a lot of different things, but I'm a Malcolm Gladwell fan. His niche is it's him.
It's him.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what I decided about me is I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to kind of let it roll, see where it goes, and just take people along with me. Whatever I'm interested in, hopefully they'll come along for the ride.
That's good. By the way, if anybody's got any questions at any point, feel free to jump in. I heard some rustling. I didn't know if that meant there's a question out there.
I'm going to be heartbroken if you guys don't ask me some questions, because this is what I love to do. And your questions could turn into a new blog post if you ask a great question. This is where I get my ideas for blog posts.
That's right.
Is questions from students.
Any questions yet?
Feel the moment.
There's some pregnant questions out there. They just haven't been birthed yet. Anything? You guys jump in or tweet. If you've got something, so we can keep going because I can ask Mark all night.
Wait, I think someone has a question.
Well, I was just wondering how you could maybe you could talk about. I know you use Twitter mostly. Can you talk about how and why Twitter? You feel that Twitter has maybe a heads up, or what makes Twitter different from other social media sites that makes it, a better place for businesses to really reach out to people?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's better. I mean, it's different. There's no cookie cutter answer for what to use for your business. I do think that Twitter is overlooked by businesses. That Twitter has amazing potential for customer service, for customer discovery, for marketing research. It's an amazing tool for marketing research. Some people think it's the greatest tool ever created. I'll give you an example of this. The cool thing about Twitter is when you search something in Twitter, you don't get links and videos. You get real-time conversations. You find people who need you now. We're talking about your products and services. So an example that I have in the book, and I'm sure you've read the book. Are you laughing?
They've all read the book.
I'm sure you read it. Yeah, I've never been a student who didn't read a book. But one of the stories I read in the book, which is so familiar to you by now, is I was doing some work with a local pizza restaurant. And so you can do these advanced searches on Twitter, which again, it's a free tool. It's an amazing tool. And we just put in there, we want to see anybody that says the word pizza within a 5-mile radius of his location. And we got a hit on that on an average, about every 15 minutes, right here in Knoxville. And people were saying, oh, I'm so broke. I wish I could get some pizza. Oh, the weather's bad. I wonder if the pizza delivery people are going to make it. Oh, I'm so stupid. I just dropped my pizza face down on the floor. So you might think, well, what does that have to do with business? Well, for the person who's broke, what if that company, that little business, tweeted back and said, hey, we've got a special today, and what do you got? What do you have? We want to bring you some pizza. What if the person who flipped their pizza down on the floor, they said, hey, we don't care. We're all about pizza, and we're going to bring you a new pizza, even if it wasn't ours. What kind of buzz would that create? What kind of loyalty would that create? The people that were having trouble with the deliveries, that's competitive information. Our competitors are having a hard time getting their trucks through. Hey, we've got delivery people standing by. Can we help you? There was even a comment. Somebody said, I saw this site that has pizzas from around the world. Oh, this Turkish pizza looks really good. That could almost be like R&D. What is Turkish pizza? Should we make Turkish pizza? What makes it so good? So, I mean, in this silly little example, we just kind of turned it on for, a couple hours to see what would happen. I mean, it's amazing how many conversations there are. It's amazing. I did another experiment for a guy that's a real estate agent in Toronto. He said, I don't understand Twitter, just a wall of noise. We put in there, moving to Toronto. We found like 48 references, 48 people who are moving to Toronto in just like a 24-hour period. He said, all these people need a real estate agent. Now, you don't want to be creepy, but what if you created a free neighborhood guide to Toronto, a little, a free ebook or something, and you tweeted these people back and you said, boy, you must be excited to move to Toronto. Here's a free resource for you, a neighborhood guide to Toronto. Don't sell anything, just help them out. And then the last page of the book said, this is brought to you by the realtor, and see what happens. So, I mean, the thing that, there's a chapter in my book, it's one of my favorite chapters. It talks about 25 ways to toast your competition with Twitter. And it's just different ways that businesses can use Twitter that they're probably not using today. It's an incredible resource that a lot of people are overlooking.
Yeah, you've grown. So talk a little bit about, definitely talked about Twitter being the drug of choice. It has been for me. Facebook, though, you've got a huge community growing there. So what I've seen happen with your Facebook page is you're getting that level of conversation in the comments that you had in the blog. So what are you seeing in that network and how that's changed? Because I know you weren't a huge Facebook fan a while ago.
Well, I'm still not a huge Facebook fan. It's good for friends and family. I think, my business comes from my blog. The content on my blog, that is what really drives the leads. I'll give you an example. I mentioned that I was meeting with Adidas. How did I get this business from Adidas? About probably 3 months ago now, I got an email from this person, and he said, "Well, Mr. Schaefer, I've read your blog for a couple years now. I've read all your books. Our CEO has read your books. Can you help us with our business? Love, Adidas." All right. No, I didn't have to send in a quote.
Right.
I didn't have to bid on the business. They basically said, "We're starting a new outdoor division, and we need your help because we don't know what we're doing in this digital space." So it was an incredible opportunity, and it's because I was able to build my voice of authority. I was able to create content that people believed in. They start to, even though this person's been reading my blog for 3 years. I've never heard of the man. He's never tweeted me. He's never commented. He's just been stalking me for 3 years. But he feels like he knows me and he trusts me because of the content I'm creating. And that's the power that we have today. That's the power that each one of you have as well. If you don't mind, I want to tell a little story about how I wrote the Twitter book.
Absolutely.
Because it's a great story because it just demonstrates something that I really believe in. When I started teaching a college class, a social media college class, around 2008. It's one of the first in the country, I think. Whenever I talked about Twitter, my students were always confused, and they would forget what I was saying, and I felt like I didn't have enough time. So I wrote a little handbook, and I gave the handbook in class. And after class, one of the students came up one day and said, "This handbook was worth the price of the whole class. I have learned so much about Twitter. This has changed my whole business." Really? It's kind of interesting. So I thought, well, maybe I can turn this into a book. So I talked to publishers about it, and they weren't interested. They said it's too short. We want a long book so we can make more money. It's got to be 240 pages. So I said, I think it's ridiculous to write a long book about Twitter. I want to write a book that someone can read on a plane flight and really understand it. So I said, all right, I'm going to do this myself. So I self-published. So I wasn't picked by, Madison Avenue or Park Avenue in New York. I wasn't picked by a traditional publisher. I self-published through a little piece of Amazon called CreateSpace. And having a self-published book within 6 months, that self-published book was the best-selling book on Twitter in the world. A year later, McGraw-Hill picked it up. They bought the rights to it, published it again. Now the book that you have, that's the second edition that came out just a few months ago. But the point is that this is really the power and opportunity that all of us have today, is that I didn't have to wait to be picked. I picked myself. And that's an opportunity that nobody in this world had 10 years ago.
Right.
And so everyone listening tonight has this, look, this is how I created my brand. This is how I created my business, by not waiting for someone to pick me. When I was beginning my speaking career, I was going to a lot of these, marketing conferences, social media conferences, and I said, well, why don't you have me? They said, no, we've got our people already. And I was really frustrated. I couldn't break in. So I started my own conference, Social Slam. I said, well, they're not going to hire me. I'm going to hire myself. I'm going to start my own conference, and I'm going to, not only am I going to be a speaker, I'm going to have other people like Jeremy, who are great minds, who deserve to be heard. And there was this whole wonderful, amazing group of people that couldn't get in at these other conferences. Said, screw it, we'll make our own conference, and it was a great success. So that's the opportunity we all have today. You don't need $1 million. You don't need a degree from Oxford University. That we all have the opportunity to use these free, easy-to-use publishing tools to create our own niche, to create our own
That's great.
power on the web.
So I had a conversation with John Jantz. You kind of hit on something that I wanted to go at. You said building your brand out. So, when you started to launch, you launched under Grow and under Businesses Grow, under that community. But very clearly, it's you, and it's your brand behind it. So the debate that I had with John was, is it easier to build a personal brand, or is it easier to build a corporate brand? And so he's got this, he's got duct tape marketing that he's put out there, but he's clearly the name behind it.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about that?
That's a really good question. I think today, whether you're a person or you're a company, you need to build a human brand. I think that's the real challenge. I think, so for me, it's easy to be a human brand because it's me. Or let's say McDonald's. It's a little more difficult because they're a big multi-billion-dollar company. But they've got the resources and the money in the advertising agency to become a human brand too. They're doing some very interesting things. A lot of companies are hearing this message, I think. They're starting to understand that people are sick of being advertised to and marketed to. They want to know the people behind the companies. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. It's easy for me to be human because I am inhuman. It might be easier for a big company to build a brand because they've got all the money and resources, to do it.
Yeah, but we were even talking earlier just about, building a community specifically. It's really hard to build a community with a brand, with a corporate brand, and getting the people behind it. I think it's really important.
That is the key.
Because it is a story that's connecting people. Anyway, that's definitely an interesting journey that you've taken there. What do we have any questions?
I have a question. This is Sam from the Orange Group. And you can't see me because, yeah, that's good. But anyway. Anyway, is there a certain level of critical mass of followers or people that comment or people that follow your blog that kind of after that point you can monetize? From your experience, is there a number, it doesn't have to be exact, but is there kind of a stage or a number in your head that's when you've made it, you've monetized it, and you've kind of grown it into a business?
That's a great question. Fantastic question. I think the answer to almost all these questions is it depends, and there's no real cookie cutter answer. It depends on your business. And let me give you an example. One of my favorite case studies is this study that was done on this bakery in Houston and how they used Facebook to build loyalty and build an audience. And I think they had maybe 2,000 followers on Facebook. But these were 2,000 people who really engaged with them, who really loved them and were their customers from the neighborhood. I don't even know how many followers I have on Facebook. I have no idea. On Twitter, I'm close to 100,000. And so for me, I mean, I go out, I speak around the world, and people read my books, and then they start following me. And I sell a personal service. I could consult or give a speech anywhere in the world. So, I mean, I have literally a limitless number of followers. I think, though, you ask a really good question there, because there is a critical mass. It's a numbers game, just like traditional sales. I mean, in traditional sales, you have to have a big list of potential customers before they become leads. You have to have a lot of leads before you make a cold call on them. You have to make a lot of cold calls before you have a conversion. So, for just like every business, the bigger my audience is, the bigger potential I have. And so what's been happening is, as my audience builds, I have more choices. I mean, my business has been good for a number of years now, but now, instead of working on a local business or a regional business, I get to work with Johnson & Johnson and IBM and Adidas. And instead of speaking for free or speaking for travel fees, now I can say no, because the rates are going up as my audience goes up. So I think that's true for any business. It gets down to a numbers game, just like it kind of always has been in business.
I'll add one thing, just because I have a unique perspective working with Mark for a number of years. When I had the agency, I did some work with Mark on his blog, and at that time, I don't even remember what the traffic count was, but email. I want to say 30,000 visits a month at least. And at that point, he had not monetized any of it. And so, in fact, it was a debate that we had at the time to add advertising, and Mark was fairly reluctant to turn that into revenue. That's enough to make money. I think the challenge there is, once you add that advertising on there, it sends a signal to the audience, and can you continue to
it's something I continue to struggle with, and the balance that you have to create is integrity and trust, and I don't want to end up looking like a NASCAR driver with ads all over my blog. I think in this very information-dense world, we're all challenged. How are we going to stand out? How are we going to be relevant? How are we going to have our voice heard? And I think there's room for radical honesty and transparency for building that integrity and building the brand. So I've been very selective. I am starting to monetize in small ways, relatively small ways. I do have a couple ads on my site. One is Billy Mitchell's company down in Atlanta. These are people I'm friends with. So I trust them, they trust me. I like being aligned with their brand. I now am being paid, actually, by IBM and by Dell. They are sponsoring blog posts. So they have no editorial control. I write whatever I want to write, but twice a month, each of those companies pay me to write a blog post that's sponsored by their company, and then they suck my blog post onto their site as well. So that's been kind of nice, because I've been writing free content for a long time, and now I'm starting to get paid a little bit, for that. So, but I mean, I believe in those companies. I mean, I really love those companies. I love the people in those companies. They've become my friends. So I've kind of tested the water, and people seem to be okay, with the little thing at the bottom saying this is sponsored by, IBM or sponsored by Dell.
I would just add one observation. You can tell me whether this is right or wrong, but the occurrence of the deuces of the world that make it a living exclusively off of their blog are pretty rare. But the ability, and she's doing more speaking and whatnot now, but the way that you've tied together the speaking, the consultancy, the writing on the blog and writing books, all those together is sort of this, the nucleus is your niche, and then you've got all these things that kind of swirl around that. It seems like that's a pretty sustainable, and there's a lot of people that act, or not a lot, but there's more people that do that than just solely make money off a website.
Well, you're right, and I think that's the key idea, is that I am monetizing the blog, but it's indirect. So as I use this example where I got this call from Adidas, that's monetizing the blog. Those people would have never heard of me if I didn't have a blog. People hire me for speaking engagements because they love what I'm writing there. So, and I think that is really the big opportunity. I can't be short-sighted and say I'm going to make a few $100s off of a blog post and jeopardize the trust of my readers,
right,
when I could be making a lot more money indirectly by being a consultant who's building a voice of authority for the blog. Great questions.
Well, yeah, thank you for answering. Maybe I need to start doing what you're doing, because the only wine conferences I go to are in Ringgold, Georgia. They're not in Napa Valley. But I appreciate.
Well, you got to start somewhere, man.
That's right.
I guess 6 years ago, I was giving talks at the local Rotary Club, and because I was learning how to do it, and you got to take everything. Take everything, because you learn every single time you do a new speech or do a new blog post or whatever. You're pushing, you're growing, and so you got to start somewhere.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have other questions out there. Now I know in the classroom there are questions. I know Laura has questions. She's got to.
Laura, you are on the spot.
Uh-oh, Aaron's got one.
Yeah, I have one. Sorry, I'll take you off the spot for a minute, Laura. I just tweeted it to you, Jeremy, but it's kind of, I have two. I'll go ahead and say on both, and then you can answer whichever one you want or both. One is, and you're kind of touching on it a little bit here, talking about just take any opportunities you can get to talk to people and really just try to sell your personal brand and everything. But is there any other kind of advice about just really getting started on a blog, like in that environment? Since taking this class, it's something that has interested me, and I just don't really know where to start, where to get going, how to promote my blogs. Like, I feel like I'm going to write them and maybe one person will read it, so I can tweet them out, or put them on my Facebook page. But is there any other way you would advise promoting that? And then my other question, just real quick, I saw that you had a blog on post-millennials. If there's any kind of nugget that you could give us about that generation, that'd be great.
Okay. Let's start with that, because that's actually the easier one. Yeah, if you're interested in that at all, it's a fascinating bit of research. I was at a conference in Arizona and got to meet this fella that, as far as I know, it's the first research that's been done on like 6 to 12-year-olds, and it makes sense. So some of the research was saying that this is a generation. They don't care about devices. They don't care about design. They just want access. And they had some really, really interesting examples of how some of the websites kind of geared toward this age. The design is just terrible, just like rows and rows and rows of thumbnails, and they just pick out their games, and as long as they can get to their games, they don't really care about anything else. What else was? I'm trying to remember. There were some. Go ahead, read the blog post if you're interested in it, because the guy had some very, very good. He had done some good research. As far as starting the blog, let's step back a second and just say you don't necessarily have to start a blog, but you need to have some source of rich, what I call rich content to develop your brand. So let me give you just a quick example of what I mean by that. So about 4 years ago, I wrote this blog post that went viral. It was like tweeted 1,000 times. And it was a very thought-provoking post. And about 3 weeks after I wrote this post, I got a call from a reporter from the New York Times. And the reporter said, "Hey, Mr. Schaefer, I'm doing research on this new marketing trend. I Googled it. I saw this article that you wrote. Can I interview you for the New York Times?" So I was in the New York Times. The article got syndicated. It went all over the country. It was in newspapers all over the world. You couldn't. I mean, it was probably worth $1 million worth of publicity. Now the question I have is, would that have ever happened if all I did was tweet, or all I did was post on Facebook or LinkedIn? All right? No, that can't happen. So to have the opportunity for massive reach, to have the opportunity to really establish a voice of authority, you've got to have something bigger. You've got to have a blog, a podcast, or a video series, basically. There's some opportunity for visual content like Instagram or Pinterest, but basically blog, video series, podcast. That's where the action is. That's how you build a brand. Now, so if you're not a good writer, can you do videos? If you're not comfortable on video, can you start a podcast? So I would say, don't really necessarily limit yourself to blogging, but blogging is the thing that's most accessible to people. And what I would do, I mean, eventually, you need to determine what's your niche. What are you going to be known for? But don't let that stop you. Don't get hung up on that. Just start. It took me a year to really figure out what I was going to be blogging about. But you've got to blog. You've got to start. You get, you kind of get closer to it. You refine your voice every time you write. So, go ahead, get started. Maybe start out just writing. Here are 25 headlines of blog posts I think I want to write, and see if there's a theme. See if there's something to something that's sustainable there. Then just start writing. Look for to build your audience. At first, just look for other bloggers that are starting out, people that are similar to you. Jeremy blogs, and I support him. I'll tweet his posts. He's a great writer, someone that I really believe in. Ask for help from other bloggers. LinkedIn. Let's say you're blogging about advertising. There are lots of advertising groups on LinkedIn. People have questions in there. Look for questions that people are asking. Write a blog post about it. Go back to the question. Say, hey, I like this so much, I wrote a blog post about it. Here's the link. Now all of a sudden, you're helping people. Maybe hundreds of people are following this Q&A on LinkedIn. It's a great way to begin to build an audience. In the Twitter book, Chapter 5, it's a very important chapter talking about how to build your audience. If you can build an audience on Twitter, it's the best way to build an audience for your blog. Because if you're finding people who are interested in you, who are engaging with you on Twitter, every once in a while, salt in one of your blog posts. And then those people will start coming over to your blog. So, I mean, the key idea is, I mean, you just have to start. You just have to write and write and write. If you want this to be a central part of your business, try to work up to doing it once a week if you can. And then also, spend time building the audience. Really study some of those techniques in Chapter 5 of the Twitter book. that will absolutely help you build your blog audience too.
The one thing I'd add, Mark, you know, I'm not a prolific blogger, but I just went through version 5 of my own blog. Just updated it this weekend. That's a little plug. That's a little plug for everybody to go check it out. But in the process of that, I went back and looked at, you know, how many posts I've done over time. I've averaged about 5 posts a month. But to your point about just get in there and write, it was really interesting to spend some time going back and look at the evolution of the content. And I think the best way to be a good writer is to write a lot. And you know, we spent a lot of time in this class, you know, talking about content, but finding someone that you can get one person to follow or 2 people to follow. I think a lot of people approach blogging or approach, you know, building their online persona from, there's a mass of people that I want to attract. I want to attract all marketers to this blog. The reality is you won't, and I think that's what when you say that, you know, building this niche, it's one of the things that I learned is there is a certain group of readers that I can write to, that I appeal to. There's a bunch of people that hate what I write because it's boring or whatever, but I've learned to craft that voice into this segment where I've got, you know, a smaller group that follow it, but they follow it pretty religiously.
Yeah.
So when
I mean, it's a great point, and you know, it can be really disheartening. But one of my favorite bloggers said one time, he said, I'm a marketing consultant. He said, I really only need 6 readers.
Right.
If those people buy something from me, all I need are 6.
Right. That's right.
You know, and we had this great speaker at Social Slam. It was a physician, and she was inspired by some of my blog posts, and she worked hard to get approved to write a blog for her hospital, and she was really discouraged because she was averaging, I think it was 4.5. She was averaging 4.5 readers a week. She thought, oh boy, you know, should I keep doing this? Well, she got a note from one of the readers, and she's a pediatrician, and one of her passions is getting children inoculated. And this reader wrote her this note and said, because of your blog posts, I am getting my children inoculated, and I'm working to get every child in my neighborhood inoculated.
Wow.
She only had 4.5 readers a week, and she said, you know what? It doesn't matter.
Right.
I impacted one, and that could have a ripple effect. Who knows how many people that could impact? So you really don't know the impact that you're having, and you never will unless you do it and you do it consistently.
Right. That's good. Good question, Aaron. That's great. All right, Laura, back to you.
Laura,
You to have one.
what did you do wrong?
About the kind of, I don't want to say taboo in social media and stuff, but like ROI. Do you measure ROI? What are your thoughts about that? And like with this whole thing with big data coming into social media, what are your thoughts about ROI and how to measure it in social media and where it's going in the future?
Well, that's, do you have those books? Give me that, social media. This is my new book, Social Media Explained. And there's a chapter in here about measurement. And it's the longest chapter in the book. It's a short book. But I get the same questions everywhere I go. Big company, little company. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to answer these questions in a book. And so one of the questions is, how do you measure this stuff? So a couple of the key points that I have in the book is, first of all, sure, we should try to measure the ROI if we can. But that sometimes is impossible. The cost of measuring the ROI is going to be more than any ROI you're ever going to get. So the example I used a little while ago, where this fella was reading my blog for 3 years, and then he finally hired me at Adidas, okay? That was a great job. It was a great account. But what was the ROI for those 3 years? I didn't know this guy was going to hire me. So it took 3 years for something to happen. You drive yourself crazy trying to measure that. So you need to have a different perspective. So a couple different things to think about. First of all is qualitative measures versus quantitative measures. Okay? Now, so Jeremy and I connected through social media, and we became friends. We help each other on lots of different ways. One of the ways Jeremy helps me is that he has a great technical focus. He can assess technology a lot faster than me. So I rely on him for that. What's the ROI of that? Here I am sitting in Jeremy's class today. Actually, I helped Jeremy get this job. Okay, so I helped Jeremy. What's the ROI of that? I'm sitting here with you. You and I are connected now. Hopefully, some of the people here are going to follow me and read my blog, and we're going to stay connected. Maybe we'll meet live someday. Maybe you'll attend one of my talks. You never know where that's going to lead. All right. So what's the ROI of me being in class today? Who knows?
Right.
All right. Now, however, that is a real, tangible business benefit, definitely for Jeremy, hopefully for you, and maybe even for me. But it's a qualitative measure. It's not a discrete measure that you can count. You can't put this on a spreadsheet. You can't make a pie chart out of this. All right? And that's one of the things that the best companies understand, that many of the benefits of social media are qualitative, not quantitative. It may be better customer service. Maybe we are able to hire better employees because we've got a great customer service, a great social media presence. So we need to consider these qualitative measures in addition to quantitative measures. So one other point that I'll make is relevancy. It's not just about ROI, it's relevancy. And I think the story I tell in my book is I was coming home from a vacation, and I was using a map function on my smartphone to get me home. It was talking me home through the GPS. And I started thinking about this. Why am I not using an app from Rand McNally? You guys even know who Rand McNally is. They're the ones that made these big atlas, these books of maps, all right? So before GPS, that's how you got around in America. You carried around one of these atlases in your car, and you'd say, okay, I'm in Colorado now, and now I'm going into Kansas. Where do I go? How do I get there? So for decades, Rand McNally owned almost 100% market share of getting from place to place in America. So I actually looked it up. Do they have an app? No. Do they have a GPS system? No. Basically, the company is dead. And so I can almost imagine the conversation in the hallways of that company 5 years ago or 7 years ago. What do you mean an app? Do you know how much money we make from these paper books? Are you crazy? You want us to, develop and spend money on an app? Look at our, P&L report. So one concept is it may not be about ROI. It may be about survival. What's the ROI of bankrupt? Just ask Kodak. If you can't make the digital transition, you're not going to be relevant. The research on the millennials, 50% of millennials say Facebook is their primary source for news. Search on Facebook has tripled in the last 2 years. Millennials are using Facebook like a search engine, all right? This is how they're finding goods and services of people and company. You have to be there. You have to have a presence to be relevant. So stop fighting about ROI and just say, wait a minute, for us to exist, for us to survive, we have to have a presence here. Now that presence is going to be different for every company. The presence for Disney is going to be different than the presence for a coal company, all right? If you're a conversational brand, you're going to have more of a presence than a non-conversational brand. And you have to think about that and make judgments around that to figure out how much of your marketing budget you're going to put into social media. But I mean, we got to stop this argument about, you know, what's the ROI, and part of it is, you know, look, I worked for a big company for years and years, and you know, it was a very well-run company. Why? Because it was run by finance people and engineers, and they want those spreadsheets and they want those pie charts. But if we don't adapt and adopt and view these other measurements, view these other ways that social media is creating benefits, we're going to miss the forest for the trees.
Good. Yeah, it's interesting when you, I don't know what the exact analogy is, but when you were talking about how one leads to another, it's almost like putting a stick in a stream and then watching it go down, and the other things that it attracts along the way. And at some point, it's got all this baggage
Leaves,
along
garbage,
leaves, all this stuff.
Old grocery bags.
Yeah.
That's very much like me.
But the idea, you know, that it's collecting things along the way, and you had no foresight that any of the, you know, that would have led to Adidas. I mean, that was not even the point. And you know, it's one of the things that I've taken away just in our interactions is you haven't written for those big things. You've written for the people that you're talking to,
right?
And they've taken that and carried it on. And I think that's a really big, it's a big part of it.
Well, it's a risk too, you know, because when I started writing and creating content, I was definitely going against the grain. All the best practices were about SEO, search engine optimization, and using, you know, getting backlinks and you know, stuffing your blog posts with keywords, and what I thought at the time strategically was, there's no way Google can allow that to happen. I mean, Google is they have to find the best content. They have to reward the best content. And so I kind of kept the focus on, instead of spending my energy and my time on SEO, I said, I want to create insanely great content that's going to attract an audience. I'm going to spend my time nurturing this audience that is going to turn into customers. Content creates awareness. Awareness leads to engagement. Engagement leads to loyalty, and loyalty is the killer app. Loyalty trumps everything. It trumps SEO. It trumps anything that they'll throw at you. I mean, I got an email, this lovely email from a lady the other day. She said, I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoy your writing and your blog. I start my day with you. I have a cup of coffee. I read your blog. That's how I start my day. My writing has become part of the fabric of her life. That shows I'm reaching a different level. That shows everything else might change in this world. She's going to start her day with me and a cup of coffee, and you know, who knows will that will lead someday, right? I didn't get there through keywords and backlinks.
Right.
I got there by focusing on amazing, and I'm not saying there's not a role for SEO. I mean, there is a role for SEO, but the issue is that over time, every change that Google has made is reinforcing that I was right. They want great content. They don't want tricks. They don't want games. They want to find the original author, reward the original author, and reward great content that seems to be moving through their network. So how did we get on that subject? I can't remember what the question was. Well, I was on a roll. I started with garbage in the stream.
Well, but I think that point, even back to Aaron's question about how do you get started, and the reason that I said that about the niche is SEO is a play to the mass. SEO is a play to get a lot of people to come in on keywords. And the problem with that is, and we did some stuff with analytics, you get a high bounce rate. They come in, they find what they want, they're out. There's no loyalty.
They're tourists.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want residents.
Good.
And I mean, the only metric I look at is return visitors. If my return visitors keep going up, that they're saying, okay, you're doing a good job, I'm going to come back. And that's an imperfect metric too. It's difficult to track. But traffic is a vanity metric, and sometimes I get kind of knocked off center and thinking, oh, look at how huge my page views are. But just Jeremy said, once you dig into it, if they're finding you through search, they're spending 2 seconds on your site, and
there's a blog post right there. Are you building web tourists or web residents? I love it.
Yeah, yeah. I'll let you have that one.
All right.
I'll give you that one.
All right. So
just link back to me and use my search terms.
That's right. That's right. So talk about content that is it's controversial. You've written some controversial posts. So talk about that for just a second, because I think you've got a good take on it.
Well, I have never intentionally written a post that was controversial. I never had it in my mind, I'm going to stir up, the crap. I'm honest, and I think I approach things in a very practical way, in a very rational way. And what I found out is that even when you approach something practical and in a rational way, if you piss in someone's sandbox, it becomes controversial. And so be it. But I mean, really, I think as I look back, that has been really how I got started. I can remember about 7 or 8 months after I started blogging. Now I come from I've been in business for a long time. And when I started blogging, most of the popular bloggers at that point had never really worked in a company before, had never run a marketing department before, had never had a marketing budget. And so they were kind of blogging in almost like a theoretical way. And I can remember they would throw out quotes like, "It's not about you and your stupid company. It's about engagement." And it's all about the conversation. It's not about the money. It's not about the ROI. And I'm just thinking, I can't imagine going into a company and saying it's not about money, it's not about return. Of course it is. If it doesn't help the bottom line at some point, it will stop. Everything will stop. So I started blogging about what I knew about business and how it relates to social media. And what I found was I attracted this big audience that said, "Thank goodness someone's finally said these things. Thank goodness someone with real business experience is bringing a practical reality to this." It was scary,
right?
Because I was saying things that were different.
Right.
Now, eventually, every single blogger turned around, every single one,
right?
And they said, "Well, he's right. We've got to show a return on this. We can't just do this for the sake of engagement. You can go broke having engagement. Cost money to have engagement." But it was scary, and it wasn't controversial to me. It was common sense.
But it became,
It became controversial. It's funny. I wrote this blog post in January that just went crazy. It was called Content Shock. There have been almost 1,000 blog posts written about that blog post. All right, and everybody said, "Oh, it's so controversial. Oh, it's so controversial." Here is, out of 1,000 blog posts, here's how many that were like 100% like directly, this guy doesn't get it. 6 out of 1,000. Because I've looked at them all. So why is that controversial? Here's why it's controversial. This is how I explained it to my wife when this was like causing so much stress at the time. What if you wrote a blog post about how all the good things about Tennessee? And everybody loved this blog post that you wrote, except the governor. What if the governor was the only person that didn't like your blog post? Now it's controversial.
Right. Right.
You know, 99% of the people love it,
Right.
but if the governor doesn't like it, now it's controversial. And that's basically what happened to me.
Right.
And it's been a huge blog.
Yeah, and I could never have predicted that. Now this post, it's showing up in books.
Yeah.
It's showing up in people's speeches. There are panel discussions at conferences about content shock, which was the name of the post.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of dominated. It became my career for about 3 weeks. I got over 800 comments on that blog post, and I answered every one of them, almost all of them. Yeah,
That's awesome. Well, guys, are there any other questions out there?
this is your last chance. I charge a lot of money for advice.
That's right.
This is free consulting advice.
They're quiet. Well, if that's it, we've got Mark's given us an hour. Now I owe him $400 for 1 hour. So, if there's no other questions, I'm gonna wrap class a little early tonight, and I'm gonna go have dinner with Mark. So, is there anything else out there?
Thanks, guys. Good
Thank
luck.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.